Okay, we're nearing the end of this pretty lengthy study that we've been involved with on Thursday night. This is lesson number 10 about criticism. Now, I want to give a clarification on the one another's. And did I deliberately omit this or did I inadvertently omitted this? I'm not quite sure, but there are 4 or 5 negative one another's that are listed in the Bible. Commands, just like the positive ones. All the one another's we looked at the other day are positive one another's. And remember, the heart of those one another's is the one that is most often repeated, and that is love one another. So there are several negative ones that weren't listed, but validate the premise that when love is not the central motivation, they can occur overshadowing the positive ones. In other words, if we are not motivated by love, the negative one another's can overshadow our obedience to the other commandments. So what are they? First of all, don't judge one another. Romans chapter 14, verse 13. And Jody brought this to my attention on Sunday. And so I went back and searched my notes out, and there are 4 or 5 of them. Do not have lawsuits against one another. 1 Corinthians 6, 7. And that's Paul talking to the Corinthians who were suing each other. So lawsuits are not something believers should do with other believers. But as Paul says in 1 Corinthians, isn't there somebody mature enough in your congregation to go ahead and settle the matter? Do not bite and devour one another, from Galatians 5:15. And then do not speak evil or complain against one another, James 4:11. And then do not seek glory from one another, John 5:44. And that's the first time I've seen this one, to be honest with you. It is a negative one another in the context of looking for praise or approval from someone else. So do not judge one another. Do not have lawsuits against one another. Do not bite and devour one another. Do not speak evil or complain against one another. Do not seek glory from one another. If everybody's got that, then I'll move on to the next slide. Everybody got that down? Carl, you okay with that? Shaking your head? Yes, okay. All right, let's go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When it says do not sue or have a lawsuit against one another, and you mentioned believers,
Yes.
is that just for believers or is it for non-believers too? You're not supposed to.
Okay. Believer on believer, we should not be taking each other to court. Believer with unbeliever, the legal system is there for us. The church has no jurisdiction when it comes down to legal matters with an unbeliever. However, there could be an intermediate stage where a believer asks the unbeliever to come to the church elders to hear the matter and listen to their decision. If not, then the legal recourse of the world is available to the believer. That makes sense?
Okay, good. Yes, it does.
Okay, was that pretty well clear then for you?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. All right, the second way to deal with criticism or a critical person. We want to talk about developing a matrix. What exactly is a matrix? A matrix is a systematic approach to analyze a problem using pertinent questions to help work through feelings and control thoughts in order to identify the issue and develop a resolution. Matrix is a tool of organizing thoughts and facts that will govern responses and direction. A matrix is preventative. This tool guides someone through the maze of data, facts, perceptions, and feelings so a clear, concise, beneficial response and decision can be made. And this definition and what I just read to you is important because of the next thought here. As I said, a matrix is a tool. Most people are reactionary. They're not preventative. So a matrix is a tool to help prevent a reactionary response to a situation or to a person. It is proactive. There is a lot of crisis that can develop when there is criticism or a critical person that you have to deal with. However, if I have a matrix that I can work through as a tool, it will help me to be proactive, looking for solutions as opposed to reaction, self-preservation. And I think that's important. Few people are preventative. Prevention is based on the presupposition that a variety of responses and decisions are predetermined based on the analysis of available data. Emotions do not rule responses or decision making. I'm going to read that again because that's important. Emotions do not or should not rule responses and decision making. That's what happens when people are reactionary and not preventative, not proactive. Facts rule responses and decision making. And a matrix provides those facts for you. So a matrix is a tool to help me to be proactive. A matrix can prevent me from becoming reactionary. And a matrix can promote prevention. It can promote prevention. And I want to remind you of the story of Daniel in chapter 1. Daniel was taken as a captive by the Babylonians. It was customary for foreign countries to take the elite of their captives down to their central hub of a major city and re-indoctrinate them into that culture. And it says clearly that Daniel was part of one of the important young men that was taken into exile, the first exile. There were 3 exiles that the Babylonians conducted. Daniel was a part of the first exile. And so Daniel knew that change was coming. Daniel knew that his name was going to be changed. Daniel knew that his clothing would be changed. Daniel knew his reading material would be changed. Daniel knew that his language would be changed. And Daniel knew that they would attempt to change his eating patterns, his dietary consumption of food according to the Levitical code. And it says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, one of my favorite verses, Daniel purposed in his heart. One version says Daniel made up his mind. Another translation says Daniel resolved not to sin by eating the king's meat. Now he's down in Babylon. They are grooming him. So when the other captives from the second and the third exile come down, they will see their most prominent people adjusting to the captivity, and hopefully this will prevent any insurrection. Now the question becomes, when did Daniel make up his mind? When did Daniel purpose in his heart? When did Daniel resolve that you can change everything about me except my dietary observation of my eating patterns? Did Daniel make up his mind when he was confronted with the jailer who said, the king wants you to eat all this rich food? Or did he make up his mind ahead of time? I propose to you that the trip from Jerusalem down to Babylon was about 1,000 miles. About 1,000 miles. And Daniel would have had a lot of time to consider the impending captivity that was coming. Now, a camel, even loaded down, could possibly walk 25 miles a day. Assuming that the captives could maintain the same speed and endurance, it would take Daniel 40 days of walking to get down to the capital of Babylon. Now, two observations here. If the calculation is true, then you know and understand the number 40 means something new is about to happen. All throughout scriptures, when you see the word 40, 40 years, 40 days, something new is about to happen. The second observation that we might want to make is, when in the world did Daniel know about this? That he could premeditate, that he could resolve, that he could purpose in his heart? Well, may I suggest to you that the prophets in Daniel's day predicted the Babylonian captivity. In fact, the Babylonian captivity was predicted during the life of Moses, where it was pictured as an eagle coming in and swooping down. It was probably common knowledge that royalty and nobility were first taken in order to acclimate them to their new surroundings. Now, Daniel was not royalty, but he was nobility. This was done by the changes cited that I mentioned. When the common man was brought down, they would see their leaders and follow suit. This was a common practice among the heathen nations. It was their way of breaking down ethnic loyalty. Daniel had a matrix, not like I'm going to show you here for an example, but Daniel had a mental framework of processing his situation and the upcoming environment so that he would be able to glorify Jehovah and be able to serve 3 world empire rulers to the glory of God and be a testimony to all 3. All you have to do is read Daniel 1 through 6 and you will realize the powerful impact that Daniel had because of his matrix on the Babylonian Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, having said that, here's a visual of a very simple problem-solving matrix. First of all, can I solve the problem? Doesn't matter what it is. This is a simple matrix. Can I solve the problem? If I say yes, then follow it down, and it says what? Get going. Very simple matrix. If I say no, it goes down to the next level. Do I know who can? If I say yes, then I come back over to get going. If I say no, drop down one more level. Can I find out? If I say yes, back up to get going. If I say no, let it go. It's a very simple problem-solving matrix. Any problem can be worked through this. It's simplistic, but it gives you a general idea. On a matrix, you are going to have questions that will be asked, and as you answer them, they will bump you down an organizational chart, and pardon that word, it'll bump you down a chart into maybe 2 or 3 different branches for you to assess the data, to govern your feelings, to control your thoughts, and to hopefully reach a biblical solution. Any questions on that before I move into suggesting a matrix for you for criticism? Pretty well clear as mud. All right, here we go. The suggested matrix, okay? Several questions that I put together. Number one, who is criticizing me? This might be important in determining how much time, energy, and resources you will invest in working through the criticism. If it is a distant coworker, less time, energy, and resources would be invested as opposed to, say, a family member or a neighbor. So who is criticizing me? Is it somebody that is close in my orbit and circle? Is it somebody in a distant co-worker relationship or a third cousin of a second uncle of a fourth aunt? This could be helpful in understanding how much time, energy, and emotions you will put into trying to figure out what's going on. Second of all, am I able to concisely jot down what the criticism is? Writing the criticism out helps to separate your thoughts from your feelings. Recording the criticism is a single sentence, provides an identifiable course of action. This person says that I am not friendly. I am cold. I am unapproachable. So if I had to put that in a concise sentence, I would put down, I am not friendly. I am unapproachable. And from there, as you go through some of the other questions here that I'll suggest, you'll be able to discern and process the data and make sure that your feelings are in control and your thought life is centered on the Word of God. Remember, this is a second step. The first step was the one another's. So as you work through the matrix, don't lose sight of the one another's. So am I able to concisely jot down what the criticism is? If you say you're not able to do that, then look for one of two reasons. You were not listening intently to what the person was saying to you. You shut down at the first negative word that the person spoke to you, or the person spoke in such vague terms that even the person probably does not know what they want to communicate to you about their criticism. That can be frustrating in trying to reach a resolution. There has to be a conciseness to the criticism in order to try to resolve it. Vague criticism is rarely resolved. A lot of times it is ignored, it is passed over, and it just builds and festers. What do you think were the critic's expectations of you? Let's say that we are able to jot it down in one sentence. Now, what do you think were the critic's expectations of you? Was the expectation ever told you, or were you supposed to read between the lines? Did the critic assume you would know the expectations? And while we're on the topic here, expectations, in order to be valid, listen to me, expectations, in order to be valid, have to be biblical expectations. They have to be something that God requires. If the expectations are from personal experience, from this is how I've seen it done in grandma and grandpa's life, and my third cousin and my fourth uncle, those are not realistic expectations. Oftentimes, human expectations are subject to change based on circumstances, based on the person's own fluctuating standards that they might have. So, if you are able to write down the criticism, is it a biblical expectation? Let's go back to the example. You're being criticized because you are unapproachable. Okay? What exactly does that mean? What is the critic expecting me to read into that? You should not read into an expectation. The expectation should be clear. So if someone says you're unapproachable, the first question out of your mouth should be, in what ways do you see me as unapproachable? Now you're going to get some data. Now you're going to get some data. Well, you know. No, I don't know. And I'm not going to take a poll of 47 people in the office here and ask them, am I approachable? We're not going to get into that type of a territorial turf conflict. What do you think were the critics' expectations of you? And then what, if any, legitimate truth can be found in the criticism? What, if any, legitimacy or truth can be found in the criticism? Often the person being criticized throws the baby out with the bathwater. Often the person being criticized throws the baby out with the bathwater, and all the banter and confusion of the criticism, there may hide a nugget of truth requiring examination. That's why a matrix can help you compartmentalize and diffuse the emotions from the element of truth that might be there. This person might think that you are unapproachable in your relationship with them. And when you ask, how do you see me being unapproachable? They would say, well, remember a couple months ago, I said hi to you in the hallway and you just walked by me. Wow. I thought we were adults here. Now, this is my human sinful nature coming out, okay? Grow up, okay? But to that person, it is a perception. Now, is that something that has an element of truth to it or legitimacy? Well, from their perspective, it does. Do I ignore that perception that they have, that legitimacy? Well, I would suggest love as the motivation. You go the extra mile, and you tell the person, I truly regret not remembering that, but I will be very, very diligent from now on. When we see each other, that I will greet you. Are you compromising somehow? Are you losing your respect somehow? No. You are love. You are loving that person. You are loving that person. And so that would be something that you could do. Now, if they begin to come back to you with a lot of other nitpicking things, then some red flags ought to go up and say, wait a minute, we need to have a talk about what relationships should look like. And then finally, not finally, does the criticism suggest anything that I may need to acknowledge, admit, or consider changing? Like I just said in that illustration, I might want to consider changing that when I see Joe. Hey, Joe, how you doing? Good to see you today. Maybe even being the aggressor, good form of the word, being proactive when I see Joe. I'm not going to yell across the parking lot or across 12 cubicles. But if I see him in the lunchroom and he's by himself or even with some people and I walk by, hey, Joe, it's good to see you today. Hey, boy, I like your shirt. Hey, what are you having for lunch? He might be wanting your respect. And so in his mind, criticism could be an avenue to get your respect. As perverted as that is, I'm not saying it's right. But am I so unloving I can't humble myself and do that? And then have I addressed the criticism by speaking to the critic? Have I addressed the criticism by speaking to the critic? Was the critic approachable? In what specific ways did I learn from the critic and he learned from me? How was the confrontation mutually beneficial? See, if love is the hub of all the other positive one another's, and love is the hub that shields me from the negative one another's, then there should be some resolution that comes to place. I should learn from the critic, and the critic should learn from me. Because the critic is not perfect, and neither is the person being criticized perfect. We still live in this old body that is saturated with the sin nature. And it's real easy when somebody rubs our fur the wrong way to get out the claws and to hiss. So have I addressed the criticism by speaking to the critic? Now, this takes one step further. When you are criticized by someone, don't go around looking for a database. Do you think I'm this way? Well, why would you ask that? Well, so-and-so said. Now you're spreading gossip. You're no better than the critic at that particular point. Was the critic approachable? In what ways did I learn from the critic and he learned from me? Was he approachable? There needs to be a resolution, as I mentioned. How was the confrontation mutually beneficial? There should be acknowledgement on both the critic's part and the person being criticized. There should be acknowledgement of where we fell short in loving one another and looking at which one another we can employ in the relationship in order to prevent the situation from happening again. And was the confrontation mutually beneficial? Was it mutually beneficial? Or did the person being criticized take several of the one another's and verbalize them, and the critic did not respond? Or the critic simply said, oh, thank you. I'm glad that's taken care of. Beloved, when there's conflict, it's a two-way street. It's not just a one-way street over a cliff. Confrontation involves two people, and both people need to come open hands open hearts, mind governed by the Word to seek an answer that glorifies God and restores relationships. And then what exactly was resolved? I think that's an important question in working through a matrix. The very last thing that you want in going through this process is to walk away saying, what in the world just happened? What in the world? I don't think anything got resolved. Why did I do this? Why did I waste this time? No, that will breed bitterness in your life, and that will put up a armor all shield around you that will be self-protective, and now you've shut down the hub of loving one another. If sinful emotions and responses were displayed, did I follow biblical procedures of confession and seeking forgiveness? You know, as you're working through the matrix, you'll probably get to know yourself pretty well. You might even begin to realize, whoa, I didn't realize that I had such deep feelings about this situation or about that person. And when you begin to recognize that, I hope that you respond to the Spirit of God that says, the hub of your life right now is not love for that person. It's devouring, it is backbiting. And so, do I need to confess? Do I need to seek forgiveness? These are biblical terms when relationships are frayed and broken. And then what aspect of communication broke down that contributed to the communication or to the criticism? How did communication break down? Many times, beloved, when there is criticism, one or the other person withdraws. They withdraw. They become distant in the relationship. Either because I don't want to get hurt anymore by this person's unrealistic expectations, or why bother because the person doesn't listen to me anyways and see what he or she is doing. And so there is distance that develops and communication breaks down. And then finally, how can these breakdowns be repaired, restored, and protected? What can we do to try to prevent this from happening again? The cycle of criticism does not need to be a circle. It should be a linear line that has an ending point to it, not a circle. Those of you who have been tuning in on Sunday night, we've seen that circle in the book of Judges, haven't we? And what has been resolved? The only thing that not the only thing, many things we've recognized, but the one thing that is repetitive is that when that righteous judge died, they returned to their old ways. Israel returned to their idols and worshiping idols, which means that their heart and their mind was never truly converted, that they simply enjoyed the blessings of God and conformed to the rules and regulations. But when that judge died, they returned to their old way of life. Like the disciples, when Jesus died, even though they knew he was raised from the dead, they went back to their old way of life. 6 of them did, I believe, Peter being the ringleader. Now, we've covered a lot here over the last 10, 11, 12 weeks that we've been together on criticism. I hope that you are developing a notebook. I hope that this is just not another certificate that I'll give you when we are done with this course. There's a lot of valuable information here. Next week will be our final lesson. We will cover the final 2 biblical responses, which are a part of the other 2 that I've just shared with you. And after this, after next Thursday, we are embarking on a new study, and it's going to be on ethics. On ethics. New Thursday night series after criticism here. Have you got ethics? And this is a fascinating study. A fascinating study. And the word ethics comes from a Greek word ethos, and a very interesting etymology history and the development of it. And it's going to be a powerful series. Even though I say so myself, I think it's going to be a powerful series on things that we are going to learn about ethics. Ethics is the outworking of your theology. Ethics is the outworking of your theology. Ethics says, I do this because this is what I believe. And so I'm looking forward as I prepare this series to share with you all. All right, questions, thoughts from great readers.
Well, I have a question, Pastor.
Yes, Miss Jody.
So the suggested matrix is designed for you, or for the person that's making the matrix, to help them through a critical response, or a critical person's response to them or situation.
Correct.
At any point, if you've tried a couple different ways and it doesn't seem to be working, and your responses have been biblical, if they seem to be not conforming, not coming around, being sort of like judges, just lip service and all of that, at what point do you say, not necessarily confronting them, but this relationship isn't working, and being able and distancing yourself from a critical?
That's a great question, and I will give you a preview of next week. And I'm serious. It's a verse that we're going to take a look at.
Okay.
See if I can find it here. Romans 12, verse 18. Let me go back up to verse 14. It's a series of commands Paul is giving to this church about relationships. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimations. Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. That sounds really great, but really tough, doesn't it? That's why he says in verse 18, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Now, we're going to talk about that next week, but here's a verse that Paul, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, realizes that there are some knuckleheads out there that are just not going to respond. And he said, if possible, that means if within the powers that you have you done everything that depends on you? Have you done everything that is your requirement to be at peace with all men? And if you have, and it's still no resolution, then it's over and done with. Now, depending on what the situation might be, I'm going to add a caveat here. Depending on what the situation might be, it might be worthy of starting the process of church discipline if they are a believer.
Okay.
Okay. I've done everything.
Okay.
I've done everything possible to live with Joe, and Joe just doesn't see it the same way. But Joe is sinning by gossiping, slander, whatever Joe might be doing. And because, in some senses, I have been responding to the critic using Matthew 18 one-on-one, which is the first step of church discipline, and he refuses, I can't let it go. The Bible does not allow me to wink at it and let it go. I need to take it to the next step, which is 2 or 3 witnesses. And if that doesn't work, then it's got to be brought before the church. Why? If you look at listen to the lesson Tuesday night about parables, you'll understand why. The parable of the leaven. There's a lot of great information in there, but there are 5 or 6 negative uses of the word leaven as sin. And a lot of times it is used of the teaching of the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees and the Herodians and King Herod himself, sowing seeds of discord. If we go back a little bit further, we did the parable of the wheat and the tares. So there comes a point, if you've got a clear conscience about Romans 12:18, and you believe that it is more harmful to the body of Christ to ignore it, then you need to take it to the next step. Does that make sense?
Could the next step could divulge something that you maybe didn't do correctly as well? In
Yes.
which case, someone else would be able to say, "Hey, here's where you sinned, where you fell short, or whatever." Okay.
Yeah, and if it's one-on-one type situation, and so the critic is bringing criticism to somebody, the person receiving the criticism realizes, well, yeah, I could have approached this differently, acknowledges that, and seeks forgiveness on the situation. It's over with. It doesn't go any further.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Make sense?
It makes sense. Yes. Thank you.
All right.